Ready, Sonia. We should start. Please go
Okay,
ahead.
let's go ahead. I will start. You could start broadcasting.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to World Teachers Day. My name is Sonia Guerriero, and I'm an education specialist at UNESCO. Before we move ahead, I would like to highlight the following points. For those watching at home, we recommend that you use a computer rather than a mobile phone or a tablet. Make sure you have a good internet connection and close any programs that you're not using on your computer. Also, I would like to remind our panelists that they should make sure that their mobile phones are off or in silent mode, and to please turn on your mute and your videos if you're not speaking. Today's session is available in English, French, and Spanish through simultaneous interpretation. To change language, click on the globe icon called Interpretation and select the language of your choice. We welcome questions from the audience. To ask a question, click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Our first speaker is Mr. Boren Shakroun. Mr. Shakroun is Director of Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems Division at UNESCO. He is an engineer and has a PhD in Education Sciences from Bourgogne University in France. He previously worked at the EU, World Bank, and the European Training Foundation. He has authored and co-authored various articles and books in the field of skills development and lifelong learning. Much of his recent work focuses on global trends in reforming education and training systems and the global agenda for skills development in the context of 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Over to you, Boren.
Thank you, Sonia, and good afternoon to all our distinguished participants and colleagues who joined us early and joining us now for this future session. I would like to make some introductory remarks, but obviously we would like during this session to hear from our expert team, from the teachers, from different speakers who will be joining us during the next hour and a half. Maybe just to highlight a few points that I think were important in terms of the why we selected this theme of teachers' leadership in the time of crisis, and what do we want to do as UNESCO to advance this agenda. First of all, I think there is no need to restate the importance of teachers in the education system and impacting the quality of learning anytime and anywhere. But obviously, it's important also to think about the scale of the disruption that education system have been in a way living during the last few months. The challenge that this disruption put on education system readiness, resilience, and as a consequence also the role of teachers in this context. We know the data about the more than 1.6 billion learners who were affected from the disruption, more than 63 million teachers who were affected by the COVID crisis, and more than that, because we are not counting also teachers for adult learning, teachers in literacy program, teachers in other learning settings. But the scale is large. And it required readiness, resilience of education system. And it meant that teachers are also resilient to those crises. Teachers had to engage in those situations, had to be innovative and creative, had to take lead to ensure that the continuity of learning and that no one is left behind. It's important also to highlight that teachers were benefited or needed also support in this context, not only in terms of teacher training, and there were a lot of emphasis on teacher skills in ICT and pedagogies, but it's also in terms of the socio-emotional support, the empowerment that they can have. But in all this, we have seen innovative practices, initiatives, we have seen that teachers can lead and lead the education system in different levels and different ways. In the grassroots, and we will be discussing this this afternoon, but also at the meso level in terms of the school, in district, and at the national level. And their voice has to be listened to in the consultation processes, in reopening schools, in building resilience, and in reimagining education going forward. There is another aspect that was important during the crisis. We have seen challenges on equity and inclusion. We have seen that the connectivity challenges are important, but not only connectivity. It's also about access to social services, for example, nutrition, for example, other services that the learners needed. And we have seen teachers engaging within communities, engaging with families, and providing that support. So teachers had to cope with the connectivity and engaging in high-tech solution, online platform, developing learning, but also in low-tech solutions, messaging with SMS and other form, but also in low-tech solutions, distributing text and learning material, books, etc. So it's important to think about teachers' leadership in those different contexts. And as I mentioned earlier, the challenge, of course, was how to ensure equity and inclusion and leave no one behind in this context. It's also important to consider equity and inclusion from other aspects, how to develop learning resources, local learning resources in local languages, resources that can be adapted to different target groups. And as our global monitoring report highlighted, all means all. It's not only part of all, it's all. And that meant catering for the most disadvantaged group, including ethnic minorities, persons with disability, rural learners, etc. So it's very important that we think about teachers' role in this context for addressing the equity and inclusion challenge and their leadership in this context. Maybe a last point that I want to highlight in this introductory remark is that the crisis showed that no system in the world was ready fully to cope with those challenges. And we needed to engage with a wide range of situations, and that policymakers had to learn from each other. We needed this peer learning processes, we needed policy learning processes, and we needed to learn from experiments, from practices, looking at different situations and different contexts. And that's why we decided, together with other partners and colleagues, to commission a research and analysis that we will share with you today, and my colleagues will be presenting them later. We wanted to know not only about what happened, but we wanted to know how this happened, what we can learn from that, with which effectiveness, with which impact in terms of the learning outcomes, in terms of, again, addressing the challenges of equity and inclusion. So this paper and this work that we have commissioned, and we will have the pleasure and the honor to hear from our research team and from different panelists. We wanted really to go to deep dive about what happened and how we can learn from that. And we will hear from our colleagues later. Maybe to finish with, I would like to put in context this the celebration of World Teacher Day. Of course, it's important to highlight that the celebration started since 1994, and we have been annually organizing the celebration on 5th of October. World Teacher Day commemorates the anniversary of the adoption of the 1966 ILO, International Labour Organization, and UNESCO recommendations concerning the status of teachers. This recommendation sets benchmark regarding the rights and responsibility of teachers and standards for their initial preparation and further education and lifelong learning, recruitment, employment, teaching and learning condition, and career paths. We have also a recommendation concerning the status of higher education teaching personnel, which was adopted in 1997 to complement the 1966 recommendation by covering teaching and research personnel in higher education. These twin recommendations also include provision for teachers' participation in educational decision, through social dialogue and negotiation with the education authority. So it's very important for us, and it's part of our normative work to highlight the importance of the role of teachers in the education system, the contribution that teachers have to achieve the SDG 4 sustainable goal and on inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all, including the target for 4.C on increasing supply of well-trained and qualified teachers. Maybe I would like to highlight at the end of this introductory remark the importance of taking a lifelong learning perspective. And as you have seen, and as I mentioned in the beginning, this World Teacher Day and this World Teacher Week, what we are starting the discussion today, we are not looking only at leadership and teacher leadership in K-12. We are looking at teachers and teaching personnel in different settings, from K-12 to early child education, to technical and vocational education and training, to literacy and adult learning, to higher education. This is important because we would like to look at the lifelong learning perspective in our debate. So I hope these introductory remarks sets a bit the scene for the discussion, and I would like now to hand over to my colleague Karen Mundi to take us through the next steps and to present a bit the research that we have started. Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Borhain, and really a pleasure to be joining you on World Teachers Day. We're going to present a study that really is a very rapid study of teacher leadership in 6 countries: Brazil, in the state of Maranhão, El Salvador, the Gambia, Ghana, Malawi, and Mozambique. Now, this study was completed within a very rapid time frame and with very limited resources. But what it does do, I think, very effectively is provide illustrative insights into 3 areas. The first is really what kind of national policies existed in each country to support a leadership role for teachers during emergencies. The second is examples of teachers themselves in their own voices describing how they innovated and responded effectively to the COVID crisis. And finally, teachers' own views of the things that could further facilitate their ability to respond during crisis. So in regard to the first, across the countries that we studied, we found that national policies and frameworks to support a role for teachers as leaders during crisis they were really not in place. Most countries hadn't formally thought through this role or prepared teachers for a role during crisis. And governments were not able in the first wave of the crisis to easily provide this kind of professional support to teachers to enable their engagement. I must also say that it was striking to us that when we tried to speak about even the concept of teacher leadership, it was unfamiliar to most of the policymakers we interviewed, as well as in some cases to teachers themselves. One of the most important things our study illustrates is that teachers actually did not wait to get guidance from government. They initiated and they innovated rapidly in response to the crisis. So in almost every country, we could find examples of teachers initiating outreach to communities, to parents, to children, to ensure their psychosocial well-being, and also, very importantly, to provide more information about the health measures that needed to be taken during a pandemic. Teachers appear to be painfully aware of the need for communication, especially in remote communities. For example, in one instance, a teacher mentions going out with a megaphone to the village square to ensure that parents who did not, or families that did not have radios or televisions could learn more about the pandemic. In some cases, teachers innovated by providing learning materials, by proposing ways to improve the early phases of online learning. And they also engaged students and their parents using WhatsApp and other means of communication, just to ensure that students would remain engaged in learning during the pandemic. They also reported forming networks with other teachers, both to provide support to one another, psychosocial support, but also to enable them to pivot towards remote instruction and to learn from one another. Teacher organizations, their unions, played a key role in this regard by linking teachers together. Finally, I just want to say a few words about the things teachers themselves told us could help them to play effective leadership roles during health emergencies. They noted that they had no professional training or formal preparation, and they wanted more because they felt that their leadership could be better harnessed during such a crisis. They wanted more training in the use of technology to support learning. Far from rejecting a digital revolution in education, teachers saw themselves as playing a central role in this revolution, and they want training to use that technology and not just during emergencies. I would also add that teachers credited the formation of networks for collaboration and learning amongst themselves as playing a central role in enhancing their ability to be teacher leaders. So empowering teachers with the tools to collaborate seems to be a special area for policy consideration going forward. Our study, small, rapid, is certainly not the first to suggest that teacher leadership is an underexploited resource in emergency situations. More can be done to strengthen this leadership, and it should be seen as a central pillar in any plan for resiliency in education. And with that, I'll close. I'm really looking forward to the other speakers, especially our teacher friends who have joined us today, to get the words from them.
Thank you very much, Karen. Small is smart. As part of the research, Karen, you have interviewed a large number of teachers, and we have the pleasure to have with us today 2 teachers whom you interviewed as part of your research. And as today is the World Teacher Day, of course, it was very important to hear from the teachers themselves, their perspective, and hear their voice as well. So in preparation of this meeting, we asked our teachers 3 questions. The first is about the challenge. So when schools closed, what was the key challenge for teachers and students? The second was about the response. How did you respond to this challenge? What novel approaches did you use to support students? And then we wanted to know more about the collaborative dimension of the leadership and how this impacted teachers' collaborative and networking and professional development. So the third question has been, how has the COVID-19 experience affected teacher collaboration, networking, and professional learning? Our first teacher is Andrés Alonso Henriquez Villalobos, a teacher from El Salvador. Andrés received a Bachelor of Education Science specializing in mathematics from the University of El Salvador, and he is specialist teacher educator of mathematics accredited by the Ministry of Education. Andrés has been teaching mathematics for 12 years in public and private schools and delivers remote lectures at the University of El Salvador. He works as a teacher leader in a new mathematics educational program called ESMATE, being implemented in the department of Ahuachapan. Buenos días.
Hello, Andrés. The floor is yours. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrés Alonso Enriquez Villalobos. I am a teacher from Central America, El Salvador, and it's an honor for me to be able to address all of you around the world in this special event, which is called World Teachers Day 2020, to share my experience as a teacher during this worldwide crisis generated by COVID-19. When the schools closed, we were confronted with several challenges. The main one was, how could we continue teaching from home if culturally we had to change our behavior regarding the use of telephones, mobile telephones, which was considered as a distraction in school, and now it has turned into the main tool to maintain communication with students. Even in many cases, looking for a way of dealing with people who didn't have this sort of technology or no internet connection. And some people had limited mastery of or limited knowledge of online platforms, both teachers and students. In the light of this situation and in the light of the huge technological gap in our context, the first strategy was to create a WhatsApp group for each grade and to use it as a means to provide guidance to students on how the lessons were going to be developed, on the solutions to put in place, by what means, etc. However, as the suspension of classes went on, more and more doubts emerged with regard to the differences from in-person teaching. People's telephones were going off all the time, they were overwhelmed, and at some points, the same questions were coming up time and time again. And so at this point, it was necessary to innovate and to look for a strategy to provide support for students' learning and to allow them to adapt to their own rhythm. As a teacher, this provided me with the space to address worries and to do this in a personalized manner. And this is when I decided to set up my own YouTube channel, Andres Enriquez, that is its name. On this YouTube channel, I explained each lesson in detail with different visual formats, and in this way, students would feel as if they were in a classroom. And in a personalized way, the students were able to access my explanations to help them with the problems that emerged in each lesson, whenever they needed to, and however many times necessary. To ensure that this way of ensuring that students were continuing to be educated was very satisfactory for me. I managed to share my videos with other teachers at national level through a Facebook group, and this contributed to the collaborative dimension between colleagues. This met with full acceptance, and now in coordination with other teachers on a national level and other teachers who have their own YouTube channel, we have been able to publish educational content which supports the government's efforts through upskilling teachers on Google Classroom, organising guides for putting content on Google sites, and also providing educational programs. To allow the links to my videos to be shared, I created a WhatsApp group for teachers and set up a national network of math teachers, which these teachers can then use this to share the links with their students to allow them to learn from these. And we have now got more than 33,000 people signed up to our channel. Due to this crisis situation, we've been able to take a step forward and strengthen our collaboration with our colleagues at national level. I'm sure that each of us have searched for ways, very significant ways to innovate in order to reach all students. And this is the real reason for the whole educational process and all the efforts made in El Salvador. And on behalf of all teachers in Latin America, I am very thankful for this opportunity to share this content with my students. Thank you very much, Andres.
It's really very interesting what you are telling us now, and you are putting, I would say, three important ingredients for the leadership. One, I think, is how you respond to the context, and what you kindly highlight in terms of the mix of the strategy that you have adopted, working with the SMS, with WhatsApp, creating a YouTube channel, creating a larger network of collaboration with your colleagues. So it's very important, this capacity to adapt, and that's part of the leadership, is to adapt and find solutions. The second, I believe, is also about how you have created this collaborative framework, mobilized teachers, and created what I will call a community of practices. I think this is a very important aspect also of the leadership, is to work collaboratively and to lead a community. And the third is obviously how you are trying to put this at scale and showing how this can be engaged at a larger scale. And you are speaking about Salvador, but also you are speaking about the region, the Latin America region as a whole. Maybe Andreas, your presentation was so interesting that I don't want you to leave without responding to some of the questions that I wanted to ask you. Of course, we would like to know from you how all this can be maintained and scale it at a large scale. You are a teacher of mathematics, but we have other, of course, subject, physics, language. So how to ensure that this can go to scale? What actions government, national stakeholders, maybe international organizations like UNESCO should do to support in the scale up, please?
Bien, considero que lo importante en este caso es, ya tenemos como un principio de dónde partir.
I think what's important is that we should have a starting point. This morning, we said with some of the teachers, I spoke to them about the national network, and they're interested not just in sharing our videos, but also in learning how to make those films. In other words, to empower them so that they can create their own videos. So I think that UNESCO could help us out, and the governments could, by providing us with the necessary equipment. The necessary equipment, not just in technological terms, because all of the teachers that are working on this are doing it with our own devices, with our own equipment. So I think that a team of trainers at the national level or the level of Latin America could be set up, and they could take a more systematic approach to sharing the experience of how to make video films and how to distribute them, and therefore how to draw closer to the students. So we could, for example, benefit from technical cooperation in order to create the spaces and the networks and to extend them to other geographical levels as well as to other subjects. We can also learn from other teachers who are innovating in other ways and to see how we can work those innovations into our endeavors. Thank you.
I have one question to you from the audience, so I will kindly keep you also to respond to it. But just to say that as part of UNESCO work, we have launched the Global Education Coalition that aims at supporting teachers and supporting the national stakeholders in responding to the COVID-19. So we'll be very happy to engage with you and your colleagues to see how through the Global Education Coalition we can provide you support. We have in the coalition big players like Khan Academy, like Profuturo. We have also some of the tech industry that are involved in, like Microsoft, Huawei, and others. So I think I'm sure we will be able to engage with you. So we will get back to you and contact you on this matter. Maybe there is a last question from my side, and then Andreas, we will move to the next session. But there is a question from a colleague in the Q&A asking what you are doing. I mean, you are of course a mathematics teacher, but what you are doing in terms of the socio-emotional skills and capacities, how you are supporting learners to get engaged, to get motivated, and to support them in a quite heavy period. What you are doing, you and your colleagues, maybe in this context. Please, Andres.
Okay, dentro de ese aspecto emocional.
With regard to the emotional aspect, we sometimes have meetings on platforms such as Zoom, where we provide this sort of space for students to express themselves and to show some technical difficulties or other types of difficulties which they might be experiencing, to take these into account and give them some sort of guidelines, although we can't have direct contact with them. But thanks to these sorts of spaces, we can provide times to get together where they can express themselves and they can show their emotions. And then we provide them guidance with regard to these emotions.
Dear colleagues, let us move to the next research team, and it was great to hear from Andreas his experience in the research that Karen and her colleagues are doing. We have a wide range of experiences, but it was very important to hear today from Andreas about the experience in El Salvador and beyond in the Latin American region. Let me move to the next part of the discussion, and for that we have a research team that is led by Mr. Paul Rodney. He's a private education consultant specializing in teacher development, teacher recognition of qualification, and teacher registration. His major focus of work is appraising and reporting on leadership in schools and educational system. Until 2017, he held the position of Assistant Director at the Catholic Education Commission in New South Wales, Australia. Prior to that, Paul worked in the curriculum branch of the NSW Office of Board of Studies. He holds a doctorate in education and a master in international education policy. Paul, the floor is yours. You are muted, Paul.
Successfully unmuted now. Thanks, Borjen, and thanks very much for your introduction. Congratulations to all the teachers listening throughout the world, and particularly congratulations of how you have handled the response to COVID. Our research, like Karen, we have had the opportunity to talk to teachers throughout the world, and surely that research is showing what has been shown in the opening ceremony this morning, that teachers are responding and being creative in their response. To do our research, we were asked to define terms and then to use those terms to explore what is happening in Australia, in the Asia Pacific area, and in the Arab nations. So in order to do that, we, like Karen's team, tried to qualify teacher leadership. School leadership is broadly understood, but teacher leadership maybe not so. I've had the opportunity to listen to the opening ceremony, and I am delighted to see that education terminology and understanding is becoming more global, but the term teacher leadership maybe not so. To help with this explanation, I'd like to go to some slides, some brief slides. To do that, I will share screen. I'm hopeful that you're able to see the core question that we were asked, and Borjan introduced that this morning. Leadership, as you see there, is both contemporary school leadership and teacher leadership. So we approached teacher leadership by doing a literature review and have largely settled on the work of Werner and Campbell, where they define teacher leadership around those terms which you see on your screen, which we have paraphrased. So teacher leadership beyond the classroom, developing others, engaged in policy, improving students in their learning, and have an influence on a broader context other than their own classroom. Our study, as I said, started with a desk study where we had to define terms beyond teacher leadership, and they were what is crisis and what is policy. And the discussion so far today and earlier in this session, it becomes clear that COVID is crisis and policy is both formal and informal. The formal policy from government is clear, but the informal policy, which may be verbal or even implied, is incorporated into our study. Our study involves schools particularly, but we have also looked at post-school education and pre-to-school education. Our study looks at, as Borjan introduced earlier, what facilitates teacher leadership in crisis environment, what might be the barriers, and we've done some thinking as regards the next decade. Conventional educational leadership, we have found, is very much a top-down model where the macro actors include government, ministries, particularly law and legislation from those actors, moving through the middle level actors or the meso actors. And in Australia and in some other countries, they are the school systems and the regional offices that sit between governments and schools. And these systems in Australia range from school systems as small as 15 schools to systems that are many thousands of schools. Schools themselves, and then there's the micro actors where we have placed the emphasis of our research, and that is, of course, the teachers, the learners, and their parents and carers. COVID-19 response in Australia involved quite a large number of macro agencies. Policy was developed at a very high level by a national cabinet, which was the Prime Minister and the leaders of the states and territories, moving through health departments within states, education departments within states, through the school systems, each time passing through a macro agency, the policy was refined and more detail added. It was fed to the school, and then the school had to contextualise that for its application by teachers, for learners, and through their parents. What we found is during crisis, the teaching and learning was enabled by policy, but policy from the macro actors didn't instruct what the policy, what the action of the learning might look like. That was still a relationship between teachers and learners, and the new player in that paradigm being the parent and the carer. So the flow of information was, in our view, fed up to the teachers, and the teachers, even though they were provided with some direction, they had to unpack that, join it with the offers of resources that they were able to collect, and then decide on the best form of action for their students. I'd like to hand over to Renee Dunleavy, who is a principal in a rural Australian school. Renee, in our view, from the research team, is a great example of a school leader enabling teacher leadership.
Thank you, Paul. Renee, if you can tell us which slide you would like us to project, please, then you can continue. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'll try to share my screen. I don't think Sonia has my slides.
Please do.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm the principal of St Patrick's Catholic Primary School in Lithgow, New South Wales, Australia, and we are located just outside the Blue Mountains, about 2 hours from Sydney. As Paul said, we are a small community and there are around 220 students in my school. Even though we are a fee-paying school, a significant proportion of our families are low-income earners. After starting my career at St Patrick's and moving on to other positions, I was invited to return to St Pat's as principal midway through 2019. I have now been the principal at this school for just over 12 months. After 6 months in the position, my leadership team and I felt we were getting on track. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Like a tidal wave, COVID came in and annihilated everything in its path. Cancellation after cancellation brought with it looming uncertainty and a terrifying realisation for teachers that this wasn't something they had control over. Teachers love control. We tick things off, we mark deadlines on our calendars, we count down weeks. Schools operate with the end points in mind, but there was no end in sight with COVID. And it certainly felt that there was no end in sight to the home learning and restrictions. Psychologically, this in itself was a major challenge for teachers. We all had to readjust our thinking and accept that we had no control over what was happening. We had to accept that politicians were dictating how we were to deliver the curriculum, and they were making promises to parents that we as a school had to deliver on. Even though we felt out of control, worried, and anxious, we also had to forge ahead to ensure our students were still able to access the curriculum from home. As a leadership team, we needed to carefully consider our approach, while at the same time having to make decisions at a very rapid rate. These were decisions that affected the lives and well-being of staff, students, and parents alike. Within this period, as a leadership team, we found ourselves concentrating on 5 specific areas in our approach to managing this crisis. I will be talking about how these factors supported the emergence of teacher leadership during our crisis. These factors included a clear plan, effective communication, effective distribution of information, quality home learning, and supporting well-being. After the initial shock, we were able to rethink how our school would now operate through the crisis. We were able to formulate clear plans for how we would respond as a school. We needed a plan that was clear to all. These plans, which were communicated and revisited regularly, ensured that teacher and parent time was not spent on the logistics of trying to problem solve or decipher the rules around restrictions. Teachers, and indeed parents, were supported in being able to focus solely on being leaders of learning during this time. Think about the school as an orchestra and leadership team as conductor. A conductor would never expect the musicians to play without providing them with the sheet music prior to the performance. Nor would the conductor simply hand out the sheet music without first discussing their plan, suggestions, or hopes for the piece. If we also think about performance, COVID brought with it a performance aspect for our teachers. Never before had their work as teachers been so transparent to the parent community. This in itself brought with it feelings of immense pressure for many. Like conductors, the leadership team needed to provide the plans and structures that allowed teachers to focus fully on providing quality home learning without any added stress or uncertainty. So, what did we learn about planning during a crisis? We learned that having a clear plan lifts the cognitive load for teachers so that they can focus on their core purpose. We learned that planning helps manage complex emotions and alleviates anxiety. We learned that planning creates pathways for teachers to become leaders. The focus on communication, again, aimed to lift the cognitive load around restrictions and procedures so that teachers and parents could focus fully on being leaders of learning. This focus also assisted our leadership team in refining our communication skills and styles. This process allowed our leadership team to reflect on our effectiveness much more than we ever would have prior to this crisis. The conductor of an orchestra uses very clear and consistent signals in leading the group. Even though each musician is at an expert skill level, the conductor's ability to communicate through consistent signals ensures the success of the performance. So what did we learn about communication during this crisis? We learned that effective communication alleviates anxiety and assists leadership in managing complex emotions. We learned that effective communication provides guidance and scaffolding so that teachers can focus on their core purpose. We learned that effective communication creates pathways for teachers to become leaders. The volume of information coming in during the peak of the COVID crisis was enormous. As a leadership team, we knew that this information needed to be distributed in an efficient way that was easy to understand. We also knew that the mode of delivery had to be consistent, so we were maintaining some sort of predictable routine in this time of chaos. The information was sometimes changing from day to day, so we knew we had to deliver and unpack that information in a way that was predictable and consistent, providing a structure and scaffold that would create clear pathways for teachers to concentrate on learning. If we think back to the conductor as a metaphor for leadership through this period, it was as if the conductor was being given a new composition before every single performance and needed to find a way to distribute the sheet music, bring everyone together to ensure they understood what was required, trust that everyone would utilise their skills and expertise, while all the while being there to guide the orchestra through the piece in a reassuring and supportive way. So what did we learn about information distribution during this crisis? We learned that when information is distributed in a consistent and predictable way, a sense of calm is created. We learned that creating calm allows teachers to focus on learning and student well-being. We learned that consistent distribution of information creates pathways for teachers to become leaders. The preparation leading up to the launch of home learning was challenging for us as a leadership team, as we were dealing with a multitude of emotions from teachers who were feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and under immense pressure to deliver on promises that had been made publicly at the government level. Our strategic focus was to deliver a well-planned and structured rollout of home learning using the Google Classroom platform. We also aimed to support parents by providing a comprehensive home learning guide that supported them in their work at home. The home learning guide also supported teachers as it addressed frequently asked troubleshooting questions and provided a clear scaffold for parents to follow. This meant that teachers had more time to dedicate to exploring online learning, taking risks, and trying new things, like recording video lessons via Zoom. Our teachers simply stepped up, and it could be clearly seen that the teachers truly had the best interests of their students at heart. All teachers showed leadership in terms of taking the plunge into the unknown of online learning. They took risks, they sought feedback, they were reflective, and they led and supported parents as well as each other. Teachers became mentors, teachers were modelling new skills, teachers led the learning for their students and for themselves. The conductor continued to support the musicians, even though they were playing a piece that they weren't really familiar with. The structure and scaffolding, however, they were there in the music, and the conductor never wavered in terms of being there to guide the musicians through, providing a consistent rhythm to follow. So what did home learning teach us? It taught us a desire to do their very best for their students gave teachers the motivation not only to get through the crisis, but to shine as leaders of learning. It also taught us that overarching structures for teachers and parents that outline how they work together provide pathways for teachers to become leaders of learning. A focus on well-being during the isolation period was crucial. This focus, however, was made much more challenging due to the nature of the crisis. Teachers certainly became leaders of learning, but they also became leaders of well-being more than they had ever been. Teachers demonstrated incredible initiative in reaching out to students and families with the aim of monitoring and nurturing well-being. Instinctively, teachers became leaders guided by their core purpose, that is, to educate the whole child. With this core purpose infiltrating their work, teachers were able to draw on energy and motivation to do their very best for their students at a time when they themselves were struggling with emotional turmoil and exhaustion. An expert musician, even when faced with something unfamiliar, can tackle a piece unseen and will play it well. A musician who has a deep love of music and of playing their chosen instrument, however, will relish that opportunity to explore and improvise with the unknown, guided not only by their expert knowledge and skill, but their sheer love of the music. The conductor, always there as guide and support, rejoices at this musician who takes the unfamiliar piece, embraces the challenges, draws on their skills, and demonstrates a pure love for the music while playing. Similarly, indicators of the core purpose of individual teachers emerged during the crisis and correlated directly to their demonstration of leadership skills. So what did we learn about well-being during the crisis? We learned that the leadership team must create the conditions for nurturing the well-being of all within their planning and practices. We also learned that teachers drew on their core purpose and genuine care and concern for their students as a source of inspiration to become leaders of learning. My experience of leading through a crisis has proven that when teachers are supported by leadership in a way that allows them to focus fully on learning, they draw inspiration and motivation from their core purpose as educators. As a result, they emerge and indeed thrive as leaders of learning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my experiences as a leader during the COVID-19 pandemic. Before I finish, I would like to acknowledge the work of my leadership team, Lyndall Marshall and Cassandra Toole, both amazing women and educators, and I thank Paul for this opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Renee. You can clearly see why the research team wanted to have Renee speak to you. A great example of a school leader, but a school leader that allows school leadership. I'll move on to giving you a little further insight into some of the preliminary findings. So we have largely completed the Australian portion of the research, and we are now conducting the international part of the research. That involves survey, case study, and interview. The preliminary findings are showing undoubtedly that teachers have moved towards teacher leadership during crisis, and some areas in particular show where that leadership has been enhanced strongly. They include the use of ICT, adaptation of programs for ICT, and the development of new relationships, particularly in the areas with parents and carers. I guess that finding is a fairly consistent finding from people that we've heard earlier in the day. But in the moderate area of change for teacher leadership, certainly the sharing of skills with colleagues, leading colleagues, and adapting for the use of colleagues are some of the exemplary findings that we've found. That slide that you see on the screen at the moment is an adaptation from the Australian teaching standards, and we chose 8 of the focus areas across the 7 standards. The standards are used to recognise exemplary teachers at the level of highly accomplished and lead, and during crisis, our surveys show there was considerable move towards lead in the areas described, but in addition to that, the art of adapting materials, the way they are presented, the way it is planned. You'll see there in the professional standards 1, 2, 3, and 6, which is the professional development sharing with other colleagues. In addition to the work we have used inside the standards, I'd like to move to other areas of change, particularly by the policy developers. So government in Australia moved to declare a state of emergency, which required, therefore, new legislation to be developed and to be implemented quickly. As Renee indicated, that was verbalised almost daily, and schools were left catching up. And early in the crisis, the gap between policy and the school systems being able to accommodate the changes in a policy may have been a day, but because of social media, teachers knew what government policy had been decided the day before, and there was anxiety when the policy that was forthcoming didn't reflect exactly as it might have been presented, or the way that social commentary had interpreted the way it had been presented. The new relationship below the teacher, if you like, or with the teacher, I should say, that being a new way of relating to their students and with the students' family. Teachers are used to working closely with parents at a school level only when the parent determines that that is a benefit to them and their child. But during crises, parents were forced into that relationship, and the majority of parents found that they were wanting in the skills necessary to support their children in the new way of learning, the distance learning. Teachers found that they were teachers of parents and carers, as well as their students in this new environment. They also found that they were supporting the well-being of not only students at risk, but the well-being of parents, due to the fact that many parents had lost their jobs or were working from home and had few, if any, other outlets. So the teacher, being a common communicator with the family, became often the support agency for those families. As Renee indicated, this had some effect on teacher wellbeing. The psychosocial wellbeing of teachers is an area that we think most probably needs to be considered more in crisis in the future. And as the crisis proceeds through COVID-19, that is certainly an emphasis that we hear other countries focusing on. Just to emphasise a couple of the barriers we found were lack of clarity or timeliness in high-level written policy caused the grief that we talked about, and also teachers, as a number of speakers have spoken about today, finding that the skills that they needed in the area of ICT and online delivery did take some time to be implemented, and some teachers, even after professional learning, struggled in that area. Teachers also found that the social divide the equity of the provision caused them concern. Families of low socioeconomic means or low parental motivation into the quality of learning struggled to engage, and it was left to often the schools themselves to provide the hardware and infrastructure to enable those families to engage in the distance learning. Just a couple of things to finish with, and we were asked to, what are the implications of change? The early implications of change are that teacher leadership, if you agree with the definition I presented earlier, needs to be named, recognised, encouraged at the local level. As Renee indicated, the leadership team in her school has named and recognised that. We have found that the greatest benefit from the crisis has been that teachers being recognised for the abilities they have, and this opportunity has allowed them to show. The word that has come through strongest in our research is collaboration. We call it the new collaboration. Collaboration not only within the school, but beyond the school, with agencies that would normally be only policy agencies. Those macro actors are certainly engaged in the provision of resource, but teachers, as should rightly happen, are the people, the professional that unpack and repack those resources for the best use of their students. How that new collaboration can be maintained will be a challenge. Schools in all countries are very busy places, and new collaboration in some areas may be a time saver, allowing a little more space. But if you are going to engage with teachers, particularly with families and their students in new styles of learning, there will be time needed in order to incorporate and deliver on that. The crisis has shown that for many students, especially students with special needs and those where education is a challenge, they most probably were not able to engage as well they might. Teachers recognised within their own delivery in pre-crisis times that they may not have delivered enough of those skills that would have enabled teachers to engage. So teachers that we have spoken with during the research indicate that they would like to place greater emphasis on self-directed learning, discovery learning, individual ICT competencies of their students, time management at the individual student level, cyber safety, self-monitoring, and some personal goal setting, as well as the resilience that we all need to cope with crises. I'd like to finish by congratulating teachers worldwide. Our research has shown that teachers have really stepped up during crisis. As Renee has indicated, we also found that it might have been for some teachers at a personal cost. Teachers themselves are individuals in crisis. Their family, their community, their children, their partners, all experiencing crisis. So in crisis times, this needs to be recognised because, as we found, and it's been emphasised regularly today in the opening ceremony and by other speakers, that education is a pillar of our society, and it's a pillar that's needed during crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul and Renee. We really look forward for the research report and for knowing more about your finding. But I would like to pick up 3 points that are critical from my point of view in the discussion in the presentation you have made. The first one, I think it was important for us to put a more and a better definition and conceptualization of what we call teacher leadership. we may mix, I would say, definition and concept. Is very important from you, Paul and Renee, to be a bit more clear about what are we calling leadership and how we are depicting that. I think the second point that Renee was presenting is the what's called the factors, and I think it was important to see those factors, Renee, that you are referring to: the planning, the communication, distribution of information, quality of home learning, and support to the well-being. And obviously, these are factors that influence the leadership and can create an enabling environment, or can rather prevent or hamper the teacher leadership. I think the last point that you mentioned also, which seemed to me important, is this the changing role and the changing relationship of teachers with their learners, but also with the families. And I think it's important to consider those aspects. But maybe what we would like also to know and going forward is if we would like, and we think that teacher leadership is critical for coping with the crisis, building resilience, reimagining education, obviously it's important to think about the grassroots leadership, but also what government can do in terms of supporting and enabling this leadership. And Paul, you referred, for example, to the teacher professional competences or standards, and obviously by making the link with what you are analyzing as a teacher leadership skills and engagement and roles, it can also support government in terms of what teacher training capacities can be included, both pre-service and in service. What support for the career development can be provided. In the session earlier, we have heard also about ways of recognizing this leadership and valuing it. A colleague from India was referring, for example, to digital credentials, to badges, and other form of recognition. So all these aspects seems to me important as well in terms of the policy framework and the enabling that should happen. But we really, Paul and Renee, we really look forward to see more in the finding, and when you'll be of course finishing your research, you just started some of the interviews and you are moving to other regions, and I know that you are with us, and it's very late now in Australia, but we really appreciate your time. You look so fresh that maybe you get you wake up and you get your coffee already, but it's really great to have you with us. And thank you, so Paul and Renee. Let me, we would like to have really the voice of teachers as much as possible. And we're pleased to hear from Andreas, from Renee, and we have the chance also to have another teacher with us who is based in Africa, in Ghana, Mr. Divson KP. And Divson, you are a teacher from Ghana. You are also an award-winning teacher, education advocate, and research fellow at Africa Education Watch. You have initiated and led the Every Child Along project, which aimed at promoting right age school enrollment and re-entry of out-of-school children in rural communities. So a very important, I would say, initiative related to equity and inclusion. You have a read-write program that which target primary students who do not achieve minimum proficiency reading and writing, which benefited to a number of students in Ghana. So, and you are a volunteer as well for the Kakuma project, providing free tuition for Kakuma refugees via online instruction. It's different contexts and different needs, but there is a thread, Divson, in the work you are doing, is the equity and inclusion is leaving no one behind. So please tell us about your experience during the school closure, what you have been doing, what are the challenges that you have faced, but also what you have done in this context, please.
All right, thank you very much, and greetings from Ghana. And let me also use the opportunity to extend Happy World Teachers Day to my colleagues, teachers across the globe. In Ghana, our school closed in March and has remained closed, although there have been some partial reopening of school for across some levels of education. The main challenge we faced in Ghana was the fact that prior to the closure of school, a list notice was given to teachers. We were on weekend, and then over the next day, which was a Sunday, the president announced the closure. So we teachers were not able to even prepare our students to go home. We just realized that from the weekend we will not be coming back to school the following day. And there has not been any preparation to help students even when they are at home. More especially students who do not even have textbooks, because we are running a new curriculum. We started last academic year, and students, there hasn't been any production of textbooks that students can be studying at home. So it means teachers will have to do a lot to help their students within this period. And it has been a challenge because there has not been an infrastructure. We have not had opportunity to have the infrastructure where we have been having a blended learning or online learning prior to the COVID. So the infrastructure for teachers to remain in touch with their students has not been there. We have cut off completely from our students, and that engagement has not been there. It took some teachers their personal initiative to be able to continue to provide tuition for their students. And on my part, what I did was to put workbook together and help with the help of the Parent Teachers Association in my community. We were able to run photocopies, and then we distributed to some students across the community, where we encourage their parents and their colleague siblings that were able to help them at home to do some reading and then complete the worksheet. We were able to do that. So that was the first initiative that I took. The next was also to give out my number, but okay, in case a student, since we haven't established contact, most teachers are not in touch with their students. If a student will need anything, my contact is available for them to contact. If it is for just even social interaction or for any support, you could get in touch. So we were able to do that, and gradually we also started the online learning. So those of my students that were able to have access to their parents' smartphone, I was able to appeal to their parents to allow them to use their smartphone. So some parents gave into that, and they help their students, their children, to use their smartphone. So we engage some of them via Zoom platform and then WhatsApp platform to continue with their studies. Those that will not be able to use the platform because we may not have smartphone, we encourage them to send in assignment to them through the SMS. And also, we're able to scale up this a bit. I have to appeal to our district chief executive, who is in charge of our district, so that we can extend this beyond the community I teach. The main challenge would have been cost of data. So we appeal that the district chief executive bear the cost of data for teachers, and willingly also agreed to that. So I rallied some teachers, and they were also able to implement some of this in their communities. And what else we have to do was also to ensure that government has come out with e-learning program on TV and then on radio. Initially, there have been challenges, so I had to write an article that was published in the national dailies for improvement in that service. For instance, calling for sign language interpretation of those lessons so that it could be inclusive for students that may be having hearing impairment. And I'm glad to say that government responded to that by including a sign language interpretation of those learning. And then also my students were highly encouraged. Since the lesson is synchronous, it was recorded and being played on television, the student may not be able to ask questions. So if they have questions generally following the TV or radio lesson, we made available teachers' contact that they can also call for questions and clarification on the lesson that they may have followed on the radio or TV. And then also, we are able to also reach out to government, especially the district chief executive, who is a representative of the government, also to continue to support teachers in their efforts to reach out to their students. Also worth noticing is the fact that the TV lesson may not have covered some aspects of the curriculum and also some grade level. It was primary for those in the upper range. So what we did was also to take the initiative to also rally teachers behind to also do their own education for those that may be at the lower level, and then also advocate for government to include those in the primary, especially the pre-primary level, so that they could also be included in the e-learning program. So generally, this has been some of the initiatives that we have to take in our community to engage our students. Even our school is intended to open in January. So we have like 3 to 4 months to go, whereby school will reach. So we still continue with the little engagement that we are having with our students, and also encouraging other teachers to use any available options that they may have to continue to remain in touch with their students. It may not be for academic purpose. It could simply be in touch so that the student will feel much value that, yes, at least my teacher has called to say hello and all this. So these are some of the initiatives I'm leading with other teachers in parts of Ghana, so that we can also find a point of education running whilst in this crisis.
Thank you very much, David. This was very important to hear your experience and your engagement. Let me now give the floor to my colleague Sonia. Sonia, I imagine we have many questions, and the different intervention from Andres, from Devin, from Rene, but also from Karen and Paul has triggered a lot of questions from the participant. So maybe I would like to give you the floor to pick up some of the questions that you would like to share with our panelists. Please, Sonia.
Thank you, Boran, and thank you everyone for the great presentations. They were all very interesting and very inspiring. We have a question about students with special needs, and it's not to anyone in particular, but if anyone on the panel, the teachers in particular, but also the researchers, could talk a little bit about how to support the students with special needs in these times of crisis. And if you have any firsthand examples that you could share with us, we would love to hear from them. We can start with Divine. Did you were shaking your head?
Yeah, with students with special need, most especially that was what I mentioned, for the call on government to also design program that targets them. And the next was also appeal to those in charge of special needs in our district to design models that can help those such so that the parents, that's the time that to need most to engage or be in partnership with parents with children that have having special needs. So we encourage our colleagues and then also those in charge at the district level to also get. Personally, what I did was also, I have some few of them in my school. So personally, what I did was to remain in touch with their parents, providing some guidelines as which they can provide some form of home learning for them. That's what personally I have to do. Beyond what I have to do was to encourage the special units of education, district education office to also design model and also help them include in the e-learning program.
Thank you, Divine. Renee, would you like to contribute?
So we were at an advantage with our very high needs children that they continued attending school during the home learning period, and our support team really did some really innovative things during that time as well, and really took off as leaders. But we were just very conscious of all of our students with needs who were learning from home, just really keeping in close contact with them. But the teachers were very conscious of continuing to design those individual plans for those students, so that their home learning was still tailor-made for them as it would have been at school.
Thank you. Andres?
Bien, en el caso de El Salvador existe.
In the case of Salvador, El Salvador, there is in the educational institution one teacher called the teacher of in support to inclusion, DAI. Now there's a national network of teachers to support inclusion, and all the students that have special needs address that network for them to be taken care of no matter what school they come from. So that's the structural part. So they get specific classes for each teacher. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. We have another question that is more about what we can do to support teachers to become leaders. We talked a lot about the experiences of the teachers. We've heard a lot about the experience of the teachers, and the researchers have told us about what it looked like and what could be some facilitators and some barriers. In terms of what can we do for training teachers to take on more leadership roles, what should we change in initial teacher education? Do we need to add more courses, remove some courses, change the model of how we do initial teacher education? Should it be a more practice-based type of initial teacher education where there's more opportunities for teachers to take on leadership roles while they're still going through an induction process maybe? Can the two researchers speak about that? But as well, we would like to hear what the teachers themselves think about what we can do to improve the development and the training of teachers to become leaders. Karen, would you like to start?
Maybe I'll start. Thank you, Sonia. I'll just start very quickly to say that I think many of the teachers we interviewed noted that this important inclusion of training or professional development in the area of leadership, especially leadership during crisis, where teachers actually become sort of the frontline workers during the response, was important. I think we're starting to know enough about teacher education to realize that it's best to teach teachers skills in ways that allow them to practice those skills. So you see in many countries innovations in teacher education programs that ask teachers not only to practice classroom pedagogy, but also engage with community organizations, have one part of their professional practicum in a non-school setting so that they can see how their leadership extends beyond the classroom. So I think that's an idea. The other thing is that it just became so obvious how much teachers themselves wanted to learn from one another, and that leadership is, in a way, we might picture it as something that's very individualistic, but actually leadership across the whole system requires collaboration. So I think that's the other piece, that having the possibility to learn across networks of teachers seem to be very important.
Thank you, Karen. Paul?
Okay.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Sonia. I think the status of teachers within societies is a critical aspect in attracting the clientele that teaching the profession deserves. So I think that's the first step. And there's no doubt that the teacher's response to crisis has certainly improved the status of teachers. The second thing is, I think that universities, and some universities that I am aware of, have started this, which is looking at attributes as well as academic performance pre-course. So people that are doing community service, people that are engaged in not-for-profit organisations, people that are able to demonstrate their interest and capacity to be other-centred, more suited to teaching. So I think it's not just a demonstration of an academic level to enter teacher training programs, but attracting the right personnel. And then once we're starting our young, well, not necessarily young, but trainees in the teaching profession, that we support them and treasure them. And we treasure the teachers that are doing what we describe as teacher leadership in schools. And Renee, I know in her presentation, described how the leadership team is looking to the capacity within their school. Part of recognising it is naming it and recognising it. And that certainly encourages other teachers to consider moving beyond their individual classroom and supporting other teachers, and that collaboration, which is certainly evident in our research, that they are cherishing, like they are putting it as the highest of the three things. We asked the question, what three things would you like to keep post-crisis? And certainly collaboration appears in nearly every response that we have collected, that the collaboration has been something they valued. And I think that's going to draw out more of that leadership, the sharing.
Thank you, Paul. We have just a few minutes left, but if any of the teachers would like to contribute, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, this is Divine. Okay. I will speak on how situation is in our country, Ghana. I believe the concept of teacher leadership is not something that is well formulated here. If anything, it is something that is emergent. That is why you have seen that within this period, we don't have seen enough of teachers that have taken personal initiative to help their students. Mostly because when it comes to our context, you see leadership, those that are in authority, they exert a lot of superiority over the teacher. And there's little or even no teacher autonomy. Teachers are not allowed to take personal initiative to do some of the things. And you may end up receiving query on a number of things that you may do. So teachers practically want to go strictly by what GS wants from them. Ghana, that's what GS and Ghana Education wants from them. And I believe when we can come to the point that teachers' autonomy is well built in part of the country, teachers will feel okay that yes, I can model leadership in different way. Aside that, we're in our context too, our system is such that authority is more concentrated on a standardized test, student passing standardized tests. So teachers only want to help students pass exam. When that happens, different forms in terms of community leadership or school leadership, or no other form that they may have taken leadership, they actually withdraw, or that they concentrate on, because when school authority comes to supervise, they are interested in how many assignments have you given to the students, how many of them are able to read, and not they don't look at what other initiative the teacher is doing. So all these things, they come to play to stifle the teacher's ability to initiate leadership across all levels. So I believe we can address the issues of teacher autonomy, and then what educational authorities look out for when they visit teachers in terms of their schools.
Thank you, Divine. Does Andres or Renee have something to contribute?
Ok, bueno, yo considero que sí se puede, digamos, implementar desde
I think that
el gobierno, por ejemplo,
if the government could implement ideas, such as in El Salvador recently, there was a competition for successful experiences in times of pandemic. And we participated, we were part of this project, and the best experiences were shared, and they had certain characteristics such as sustainability, ease of replication, and it was very inspiring for a lot of teachers to have this sort of incentive. And there's also technical support provided. With regard to the status of teachers, I consider that we have been able to put a spotlight on teachers' work during this crisis, as students are now at home, so their parents are aware of everything that developing educational programs involves, and the parents are now part of the education that the children receive in schools. Also, with regard to the programs for initial teacher training at universities, I consider that there's often a divide between what's taught, which is purely academic, and the practical side. And this is because in many cases, the professors who train teachers have been training teachers for 20 years within the university without having direct contact with the schools. And so they remain within the same paradigm that they were in 20 years ago. And the practical side of current teaching is not transmitted. Also, as teachers, we consider that we have this investigative capacity, but contrary to this is the fact that work can sometimes be overwhelming because teachers have 2 or 3 jobs to do at the same time, and this work can become too much for the time available. Trying to innovate, share things, the problems that can arise with regard to teaching or students learning, marking work, writing down marks and grades. These are things that need to be looked into further in the area of teaching.
Thank you. We're almost over, but we'd like to hear from Renee one last time. I know you wanted to say something before we end. Go ahead, Renee.
So our leadership team are very conscious of sort of working explicitly with our teachers around reflective practice, which we feel is, critical in terms of being an effective leader and something that doesn't always come naturally to people. So in terms of the work that we do with teachers, we're very conscious of creating the conditions for that reflective practice to occur, not just around student learning, but also around teacher performance. So we're very conscious of that, and we're very conscious of providing opportunities for our teachers, for the leadership team to model for the teachers and coach them through difficult situations and supporting them and seeing how we do those things. So we have those scaffolds in place that allow the teachers to start building on those skill sets in terms of those quality reflective practices that are so important with leaders.
Thank you, everyone. I pass it back to Boren to close up the session.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Karen, Paul, Devin, Renee, Andres for a really very rich discussion, which I wouldn't dare summarizing now, but I would like to pick up 5 points that we will take forward in terms of our research. I think we have heard today about first the importance of teachers' agency as a professional that can take lead and can engage in initiative, find solution to related to local context, local challenges in time of crisis. We have seen also the importance of the collaborative framework, the community of practices, and how a teacher can engage with the peers and can engage in the wider teacher community. So I think this collaborative framework, and Paul mentioned that as well. We also have seen the importance of engaging in this mix of technology from high tech to low tech to no tech solution, as Devin was referring to. Andreas also was referring to low tech solutions combining TV, radio, and WhatsApp, and engaging in using mobile phones and other tools that can be mobilized. We also have heard about the importance of the leadership for a purpose of leaving no one behind, equity and inclusion. What are the initiatives that are taken for example, persons with disability or other groups that require with the special needs. I think the last point that we were discussing, and Renee was referring to that, but also Andres and other colleagues, is what will be the policy action in this case? How to create an enabling environment. And we have seen aspects related to training, aspect related to what Renee was calling scaffolding and capacity to support. Also, what Andres was referring to as an incentives that you can create, for example, through a word, through impulsing this collaboration. But also, I believe, and Paul referred to that earlier, about the societal perspective and the status of the teacher in this context. Some of these issues are related to the COVID and related to the situation that we are living today, but others are structural, and we would need to take them into that direction. Of course, Karen, Paul, and other colleagues will continuing the research, and please stay tuned, stay connected with us. If you have also experiences that you would like to share, resources that you'd like to share, please do in the Q&A. We are collecting them, and I'm sure that Karen and Paul will be very happy to see more material coming from you as participants. Let me remind you that we recorded this session and that it will be available. We have also a synthesis report that will be made available on our World Teacher Day website after the events, and obviously we'll be working on all these discussions that we have had today. We also hope, and as we mentioned on several occasions, and also in the chat and the Q&A, this is World Teacher Week, and we would like you to continue engaging with us. There are different events that are coming. The next one will be tomorrow at 10 o'clock Paris time, which will focus on teachers for youth and adult literacy, and the challenge that they are facing around their professionalization in this sector. So please come back tomorrow morning, Paris time, late in the afternoon for Paul, very early in the morning for Karen, also for Andreas, but please join us and stay with us, stay tuned to the different events. Thank you, Sonia, for organizing this, and thank you to all colleagues who contributed to the logistics, to the interpreters who have been with us since the morning and have been engaging. And I hope that we have enjoyed this diversity of languages. That's what UNESCO is for, is languages, diversity of culture, diversity of experience. Stay well. Have a nice evening, day, and night, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
The recording has stopped.